Thanks, Tom. I'm Charles Pattison. I'm president of 1,000 Friends of Florida, and thank you for letting me be here today. I'm here with Joanne Davis, our community planner in Lake Worth and Palm Beach, Martin area. Usually I come behind Maggie, which is never a good idea, but I think it's good to get the bad news out and over with early. Usually there's not too much good news that comes from Tallahassee. Last week there was some good news. The legislature had left town. Unfortunately, they came back. And, they'll be up there for a while trying to figure out redistricting and then maybe some other things later. This session was supposed to have been quiet. The Senate filed 1,044 bills. The House filed 1,008 bills. 52 Senate bills passed. 240 House bills passed. Of course, I think you know the process. These bills go to the governor for his signature or not, or veto. He doesn't have line item veto authority like he does for the budget. So if you're interested in following different bills, I've got a handout. They're out there on the front table. It's got a lot of the bill numbers that I'm going to make a few comments about. And then 1,000 Friends is going to do a free webinar to talk a little more about these bills on March 29th, 1 to 2:30 if anyone wants to key in. It's free, so help yourselves if you are so inclined. But I think the process, just make sure if you're looking at bills that you look at the right version. There's a lot of well, I wouldn't call it trickery, but you have to be careful to know that you're looking at the bill that actually passed. A couple of terms just to keep in mind. If you do go to, the legislature has a website. It's called Online Sunshine. And you can go there and you can follow what's going on in either the Senate or the House. But make sure you look for the final version of the bill. That's always called the enrolled version. There'll be something else called an engrossed version. That's usually the version that leaves a House or a Senate committee. And once it's fully adopted by the legislature, they change it to an enrolled version. So just make sure you see the right one. So let me get into the substance. There was one major growth management bill. It's called a glitch bill. They were working so hard last year to gut growth management that they left a few things out. So they had to go back this year. Actually, fortunately, nothing of substance, but they had to make consistency, statutory references, and things of that sort. They added a few little things. There was an item to settle the Yankeetown lawsuit from last year. There was a constitutional challenge on the growth management bill that Yankeetown filed that said that they had a charter provision that required a super majority vote, and that the legislature couldn't just rule that out. So they challenged that. The settlement was to put into this glitch bill an allowance for any community that had charter provisions for referendum votes. I'm sorry, I said supermajority. It was for referendum votes on plan amendments or development orders. Another change that happened is that there's a new requirement that for population projections in local governments that they have to be distributed between an incorporated area and a county area. In the past, the population numbers are given for a county, so Martin County would see a number. There was never any basis for how you distribute that between Stewart or the county, and that could lead to some false growth management projections, but that could be abused, I'm sure, so we'll find out if that's going to be properly enforced. They made a lot of small adjustments to school concurrency, and it's not banned outright. Local governments can still keep school concurrency as they can road concurrency. It's just that there's some limitations on how you do it if you decide to do it. And interestingly, I think the legislature was wrapped up in the idea that we were going to do the public a favor and get rid of these things, or at least give local governments the ability to get rid of it. And guess what? About excuse me, 95% of local governments have decided to keep concurrency requirements. There were some limitations on what regional planning councils could do, and there was a compromise reached that basically says they can contract for services as long as what they're doing is something that's required by statute. They had run into an objection about from a consulting firm that thought the regional planning councils were taking their business. And the original idea was to prohibit them from doing any kind of consulting work, but that was worked out. House Bill 979, the DRI bill. There's always a DRI bill every year. This one adds one more exemption for local governments and developers to look at if the state agrees that some DRI-sized project is promoting it's called a targeted state industry. Usually it's medical, that's one of the biggest, manufacturing, I can't remember the list, but you have to get a certificate from the DCA replacement that says you qualify before you can consider this, so we'll see if that amounts to anything. There were limitations on what state agencies can comment on in DRIs. They can only comment on things related to, and you helped me figure this out, their core missions. It's not their core mission they can't comment on. So we'll see what people are able to do about that. And then it seems like every year that we do have a DRI amendment, we also have an amendment coming out of Palm Beach County for something called an ag enclave. This is meant to say that if the property owner is surrounded on 95% of his borders by other land uses, then he's basically entitled to get that land use, whether the local government likes it or not. Of course, the paradox here has been that all of these changes were meant to give local government more control. It's just that when the state thinks that things aren't going quite right, they want to override local government. The one big fight that did surface in this bill was something, a bad amendment, excuse me, to prohibit statewide supermajority votes on any plan amendment or development order. And several local governments have decided that a simple majority is not adequate and that they do require an additional vote of their elected body. And so this amendment tried to be slipped in at the last minute, but we were able to keep that off the ultimate bill. There was another bill, 4003, that just eliminated a dead trust fund, in case you hear something about that. The state had an urban infill and redevelopment trust fund funded one time in 2002 and never got any additional money in it. So this was meant just to eliminate that bill. Senate Bill 692 was one that I've called the sleeper bill. It makes it easier for independent special districts to incorporate as cities. We're not sure yet, I don't think anyone else is, of what the real effect of this is. We know there are 3 or 4 places where this was focused, and one of these, again, was in Palm Beach County. But the significance of incorporating is that when you do that, you have to meet certain requirements, but when you do, you get to adopt your own comprehensive plan. And typically that's going to mean something different than what's in the county's plan that controls. Definitely something to watch. This is an interesting bill, House Bill 599, a DOT mitigation bill. It started off requiring the DOT to only buy mitigation credits from private mitigation banks, which was good for mitigation bank owners, I guess. It ultimately was changed to a consideration request by DOT, but just shows you that there are always people looking to promote special interests. Let me move to water issues. Senate Bill 1986 passed, This was a big deal to a lot of conservation groups that tried to, well, this was a compromise that went back to address some of the bad changes that were made in growth management last year. You might remember legislatures took away the ad valorem taxing authority reduced it substantially for all the water management districts, contrary to what the boards of these water management districts wanted to do. That was because I think there was a lot of angst, there still is, over the idea that water management board members who are not elected have a say-so in a tax situation. So this went back and took us back to the time before those changes were made. It does include some oversight and some ability for the legislature to weigh in on individual water management district budgets, which can be of concern. There was a fight over this bill, a bad amendment that was being pushed by Miami-Dade County to take 350 acres out of the conservation area that the South Florida Water Management District had purchased for conservation needs and give it to FIU. We wanted to use the land to trade to Miami-Dade, excuse me, for a medical facility. That ultimately was knocked out. But the authority that is there for the legislature and its budget commission includes the following. They can veto any land purchase greater than $10 million. They can prohibit purchases of anything larger than $50 million in a single year. They can veto debt incurrent or issuance of debt certificates. They have the ability to veto management or administration costs that exceed 15% of the budgets that have been submitted. So they still have a fair amount of oversight. I think a lot of us never understood that this authority was there previously. So the compromise was to put some language in that gave the legislature a little more comfort without a lot more authority. Another water bill, House Bill 639, this has to do with reclaimed water. Local governments get a permit, of course, to withdraw water from the subsurface. Their ability to do or sell the treated wastewater has been a kind of a point of contention for a couple of years. The original bill would have eliminated treated wastewater from the definition of state water. The significance of that is that if you did that, you don't have any permit control over it by the water management districts. There was a compromise reached that said this would remain something that's subject to permit review, but the local governments would be allowed to make the choices on where and who gets this treated wastewater. Another water management bill that didn't pass would have granted 30-year consumptive use permits. I think all of us were nervous about the idea that you could foresee what 30 years of water needs might be and give that kind of permit to someone was a big issue. Some other environmental legislation. House Bill 1103 failed. This involved something between 100,000 and 500,000 acres of land that was public land that would have been turned over to private property owners. The game here was to change the definition of state lands by moving from a mean high water mark to a mean low water mark. That would have benefited anyone on a freshwater system, a river, a lake, a pond. Would have pretty much eliminated people's ability to walk on the shoreline and things of that sort. There was quite an outcry over this, and this failed to pass. Another good idea that didn't happen, unfortunately, was oil drilling on state land. This would have Well, it's interesting, I guess, when you look at the background. The Blackwater River State Forest up in the Panhandle actually does have, I think, one producing oil well. It's on state land, it's leased. And the person doing the lease had found oil in other areas within that park facility, and so they wanted to be able to tap that without having to go out on bid, which is the current process. So this would have, their solution was to say you would allow oil drilling anywhere without bids. That didn't happen, and we're glad about that. House Bill 421, Senate Bill 604. This was the fertilizer preemption bill. It failed. This would have said that no local government can establish a fertilizer control ordinance other than what the state standards have or are. And of course, that's a big water quality issue statewide about fertilizer runoff, and a lot of local governments have stepped up to make that an important issue, and their standards can and still will be able to exceed state standards. Senate Bill 724 failed. This was an ocean outfall bill that would have given another 2 years to the South Florida ocean outfalls to meet the advanced wastewater treatment standard for discharging into the ocean. It would have extended the time to December of 2020. A lot of the reef organizations were very pleased to see this one fail. House Bill 115 and Senate Bill 558 failed. This would have eliminated the current prohibition of septic tank septage, waste, whatever you want to call it, being applied on lands in the state. There's currently a prohibition on that for, again, nutrient runoff considerations. That failed, or they failed to overturn the prohibition, so that continues to stay. But there is another bill, House Bill 1263, that passed. This deals with septic tanks and local government's ability to control those. The gist of the bill initially, and as part of the final bill, was to eliminate this 5-year inspection requirement that came about a couple of years ago as part of the Wekiva River Special Management Area. And this bill, as it passed, prevents local governments from having an inspection program, first of all. It does allow them to have one if they follow a very regimented state set of standards, which are not as strict as some of the ones that local governments currently have. It eliminates the ability of a local government to describe what a failed septic tank means. Basically now, if you don't see sewage on the ground, it hasn't failed. And we know that there could be nutrient problems before you ever get to that point. Let's see what else. A lot of local governments had requirements for something called performance-based systems. These are more expensive and do at least an initial job of removing nutrients from the wastewater stream that goes into the drain fields. Again, as a water quality issue, now local governments are prohibited from having requirements for those kind of septic tanks. They're also prohibited from requiring a septic tank inspection at the time of the sale of the home. It does require communities with first magnitude springs, and that's where these are ones we're talking about primarily in North Florida. It does require them to have a septic tank inspection program. It allows them, though, to exempt themselves from that if they have a 60% vote of their elected officials that they don't want to do it. But if they do have the program, they again have to follow a regimented set of state standards. Something that the conservation community is sad to see happen. Another bill that people were sad about, Senate Bill 268. This was the one that we labeled it billboards on greenways. A compromise had been worked out to limit where these advertisers could place signs on 7 greenways in the state. It was sort of like let's at least try this sort of as an initial thing. And that was the compromise, and then on the last day, that stayed in there, but then there was another sentence that said, but you can also do this anywhere in the state. So, unfortunately, we'll have to see how that plays out. House Bill 1117 passed as a favor of zoos. This was interesting. Audubon was one of the leaders in trying to point out the problems with this. Public lands can now be leased such that exotic zoo animals can be placed on public lands. I'm not sure how far this is going to go, but if you see a zebra on the side of the road, one of the big environmental bills, House Bill 503, passed. It was called a permit streamlining bill. We did not engage on that. Most of the conservation groups that were following this seemed minimally satisfied. It did streamline some permit requirements, shorten some time frames, but didn't change any of the substantive requirements. There was a fight at the end. Miami-Dade tried to get an exemption to build a boardwalk into Biscayne Bay, but that was ultimately taken out, fortunately. The other environmental bill, 7003, is one that requires DEP and the water management districts to have a consistent environmental resource permit application, supposedly still recognizing the different regions' circumstances. We'll have to see what that amounts to. Let's talk about funding. The overall budget, $70 billion, roughly what it was last year. As far as Florida Forever goes, the governor asked for $15 million. I think you know this was the biggest program in the nation a couple of years ago, $300 million a year for 20 years. That's been substantially reduced. So the governor asked for $15 million. The House had $0 in it. The Senate had $0 in their budget, and the budget that passed does contain $8.4 million for public land acquisition for the coming year. On Everglades restoration issues, the governor had requested $40 million. That's substantially less than what we've seen in the past. $100 million had been more normal. The House had $35 million in its budget. The Senate had $0 in its budget, and the ending amount was $30 million that was agreed to. The Sadowski Affordable Housing Trust Fund is another system that's set up to, based on real estate transactions. There's a tax that's paid into a trust fund to help with affordable housing needs around the state. It generates about $100 million a year to go to affordable housing. The governor had asked for just under $30 million. The House and the Senate had $0 in it. They took all the money out and used it for other general revenue needs. One thing of interest, I think we've talked in the past maybe a little about something called the Heartland Expressway. It's a project that's designed to run from Polk County, this I-4 area, kind of down the center of the state and cut back over into somewhere, Charlotte County, maybe someplace like that. The Senate Appropriations Chair managed to get $36 million put in for the start of that roadway system at the northern end of the state. So we'll see what comes of that. Just shows you how powerful someone like an appropriations chair can be, even in a tight budget situation. The session is, I think I mentioned, they're back in town to do some redistricting. they're probably going to have to come back again after they finish this, because the court challenge on the state employees' contribution to their retirement accounts, it's not clear where things will end up with that. If that item by itself, though, were to not get resolved, it'll put a $1 billion hole in the budget currently, and the budget that's projected for next year. So there could be some additional cuts coming. I'll end it there. If there's some questions I can answer, I'd be glad to do that. There's a handout outside if you'd like to see some of these buildings, or they're inside.